Have you ever cleaned your home top to bottom, only to feel like nothing really changed? The rooms look tidy. The counters are wiped. Even the floor sparkles. But there's still this weird, heavy feeling in the air. Like something's stuck even when everything looks done. That's what happened to James. He spent his entire Saturday organizing the house. He vacuumed, rearranged furniture, donated clothes, took out trash. But Monday morning came, and his money flow still blocked. His mind still foggy. His energy still dragging. It didn't make sense. Until someone pointed out the one place he hadn't looked. His storage. Not the messy kind. Not the obvious hoarding piles. But the quiet corners. The bins behind the door. The boxes under the stairs. The drawers packed with, "I might need this one day." In Feng Shui, storage isn't just about space. It's about energy. What you keep, where you hide it, how it breathes in your home or doesn't. And that's the part most people get wrong. We think the clutter has to be visible to cause a problem. We think if we close a door, shove it behind a curtain, tuck it in a drawer, the energy goes away. But it doesn't. It lingers. It collects. And worse, it blocks the exact kind of wealth, opportunity, and clarity we're working so hard to attract. If this kind of wisdom speaks to you, thank you for being here. Feel free to hit like, subscribe, or even drop a comment below. It helps YouTube know you're part of this quiet, mindful shift. Today, we're walking through 5 Feng Shui storage mistakes that quietly trap your money flow, and how you can free it one shelf, one drawer, one quiet corner at a time. Let's begin. James always thought he was the tidy one in the family. Not obsessive, just careful. He liked knowing where things were. And after he retired early, he took real pride in setting up his new home just right. Especially the closets. Especially the storage. There was a hallway at the back of the house. Quiet, narrow, barely wide enough to walk through without turning sideways. James liked it that way. He installed a slim white door there. Tucked a few labeled bins inside. One for Christmas decorations. One for random cables and cords. One for old work stuff he hadn't touched in years. To him, it felt organized, practical, clean. But here's the strange part. Every time he walked past that hallway, he held his breath. Not on purpose. It was like his body knew something his mind didn't. The air there was heavy. Still, like energy didn't want to move through it. He noticed the light bulbs dimmed faster there. His plants wouldn't grow near it. The air felt colder in summer. He thought, maybe it's the insulation. Maybe it's the layout. But he never thought it was the storage. Until his niece Emma came to visit. She's a yoga teacher from San Diego. All incense and intuition. James thought she'd be the kind to point out his unmatched coffee mugs or dusty baseboards. But no. She walked through the hallway, paused, and said, "Why does this part of the house feel like it's holding its breath?" James blinked. "It's just a utility closet." Emma didn't say anything. She just opened the door. The bins inside were stacked up neatly, tight against the doorframe. One of them even blocked the hinge from opening fully. She turned to James. "This right here is where your energy stops." He laughed. "You mean airflow?" She shook her head. I mean money, luck, possibility." And James froze. because the last 6 months of his life had felt exactly like that hallway. Still, heavy, weirdly jammed. His money wasn't flowing right. Little bills kept showing up. His credit card got hacked twice. The IRS sent him a letter with a typo but still made him call. And through all that, he thought, well, that's just life. But what if it wasn't? What if it was storage? Not clutter in plain sight, but hidden clutter silently blocking the energy he didn't even know he needed. Emma said something he never forgot. Energy sees what your eyes don't. And when he looked closer, he realized he had things stored behind every door in that house. Boxes under the guest bed, a plastic bin behind the bathroom door, even a broken vacuum cleaner behind the basement steps. He thought it was practical. Turns out it was a pattern. A quiet way of saying, I'll deal with this later. And Feng Shui doesn't wait for later. So that night, James emptied the hallway closet. Not all at once. Just enough so the door could open freely. So the space could breathe again. And you know what? It felt like he could breathe again too. Funny how something so small, a storage bin behind a door, can quietly hold your life in a chokehold. James felt lighter after clearing the hallway closet. Just a bit. It wasn't like the sky opened and money started pouring in, but something in the house had changed. It was subtle the way light felt a little softer in the morning. How the air didn't stick in his throat when he walked through that back hall anymore. He even started looking at other parts of the house with new eyes. Like maybe, just maybe, he hadn't been as organized as he thought. And that's when he noticed the shoe cabinet. The big one. The one he bought from a second-hand shop 5 years ago, a dark walnut beast with 2 tiny drawers on top and deep compartments below. He kept it right inside the front door. It was practical. Held gloves, scarves, old receipts, and a flashlight that didn't work. But it also stuck out into the walkway just a little too far. You had to angle your body to walk past, especially when carrying groceries. Especially when the door didn't fully open because the rug kept catching. He'd never questioned it, until his old friend Marvin dropped by. Marvin was the kind of guy who always noticed the things no one else did. A retired trucker who now taught Tai Chi on Wednesdays at the local rec center. He'd been through a messy divorce, 2 health scares, and still greeted life with the same slow smile and strong coffee. They were having tea that afternoon. Marvin set his mug down and pointed at the shoe cabinet. You ever wonder what that thing's blocking? James raised an eyebrow. What? The door? Marvin shook his head. Number the entry, the invitation, energy. James rolled his eyes. You sound like Emma now. Marvin chuckled. I'm just saying, every time I walk in here, I feel like I'm being stopped before I even start. That hit James harder than he expected. Because lately, that's exactly how life felt. Stopped before it started. He'd been applying for part-time consulting jobs, no callbacks. Trying to sell some old collectibles online, nothing moved. Even simple things, like getting a plumber to show up, turned into a week-long affair. And now he was starting to wonder if it had something to do with how energy entered the space in the first place. He walked over and looked at the cabinet again. It was sturdy, reliable, but also heavy, bulky, and honestly kind of grumpy looking. It had always been just there, but now it felt like a gatekeeper. Not in a wise old owl kind of way. More like a bouncer saying, Sorry, wealth's not on the list tonight. James sat down and let that sink in. In Feng Shui, the entryway isn't just a physical space. It's a portal. A place where energy, luck, and opportunity first touch your life. And what had he done with his? Shoved a giant wooden barricade right in the middle. All in the name of storage. He didn't want to get rid of it. But he couldn't ignore the way it made the whole house feel like it started with resistance. He remembered something Marvin said years ago. Sometimes you gotta let go of the thing that holds everything so something new can come in. So that weekend, James moved the cabinet. Not out of the house, not yet. Just out of the entry. Into the guest room. And in its place, he added something simple. A small bench. A tray for keys. A plant with leaves that leaned toward the light. The difference was instant. Not in his wallet, not in his inbox, but in his chest. Walking into the house felt open, like he belonged in his own space again. And the next morning, for the first time in months, he got an unexpected email. A neighbor was downsizing. Would James be interested in helping sell some antiques? Split the profits 50/50ths? He smiled, not because it was a big deal, but because it was movement. Something had opened, and maybe, just maybe, that heavy cabinet had been blocking more than just shoes. It wasn't until James started going through his old drawers that he remembered the envelope. It was tucked inside the bottom compartment of his nightstand, wrapped in a yellowed receipt from 2019. $465 in cash. He'd forgotten it was there. Something about emergency money. He couldn't even recall why he chose that exact spot. It just felt safe at the time. Hidden, private, untouched. But as he held the envelope now, there was a strange weight to it. Not because of the money, but the feeling. The paper was cold. The edges curled. It didn't feel like money waiting to be used. It felt like money that had been ignored. Like it had waited too long in the dark. James sat on the edge of the bed. The house was quiet. But something in him stirred a question he hadn't dared to ask himself before. What else have I hidden away and forgotten? That's when he remembered the coffee can in the garage. The small safe in the closet he hadn't opened in 2 years. And the most ironic one, the shoebox in the laundry cabinet labeled "Do Not Throw." He opened them all. Inside were coins, old checks, a gift card from a hardware store that had closed, a tiny jade charm he didn't remember receiving, and oddly, a broken watch. Each one tucked in a safe spot. Each one sealed in time. And in Feng Shui, that's the problem. When you hide your wealth in forgotten corners, you don't protect it. You freeze it. You separate it from flow, from use, from recognition. Money, like energy, needs to move. To be acknowledged. To be trusted. James suddenly saw it. All the places he thought he was being smart about security were the exact places where energy had gone to die. His money wasn't protected. It was trapped. And somehow that mirrored how he'd been feeling for months. Not unsafe, not poor, just frozen. Like the more he tried to hold on to stability, the more everything slowed down. He remembered something his neighbor Kathy once said over coffee. She worked as a massage therapist and always spoke in metaphors. She said, "You can't clench your fist and expect blessings to land in your hand." At the time, he laughed. Now, it felt uncomfortably real. That night, James did something that felt strange at first. He gathered all his hidden money, the cash, the gift card, even the coins, and placed them in a wooden bowl on his desk. Not to spend, just to honor, to let it be seen, to let it breathe. He also moved the jade charm to his entryway shelf, near a photo of his parents. And for the first time in years, he opened the safe and cleared it out. The act wasn't dramatic, but it felt like opening a window inside himself. And here's the twist. Within 48 hours, he received 2 payments he'd completely forgotten about. One was a refund from a dental overpayment. The other? An Etsy shop he'd abandoned 3 years ago. Someone found an old link and bought one of his vintage posters. He laughed out loud. Not because it made him rich, but because it made him feel again. It reminded him that movement isn't just about doing. Sometimes, it's about releasing what you locked away without realizing. And hey, if any of this has made you stop and think, maybe it's time to look through your own safe spots. Not just to find cash, but to see where your energy has been waiting for you to come back. It was a gray Thursday when James opened the drawer. He didn't mean to. He was looking for extra candles. Oregon had been hit with light outages all week, and in the middle of the hallway console, his fingers brushed the brass handle that hadn't moved in years. The drawer gave a faint creak. Old wood. Old air. And something else. Time. It smelled like dust and dry paper. Inside were things he'd completely forgotten about. A photo strip from a carnival, younger versions of him and his late wife, grinning, windblown, holding matching cotton candy. A baby sock. Just one. He couldn't even remember which child it belonged to. A napkin from their 20th anniversary, scribbled with the words, "Still you, always." He sat on the floor, not out of drama, but because standing didn't feel right anymore. The air changed when you let the past out of hiding. It didn't rush at you. It just sat beside you, soft and heavy, like grief that learned how to whisper. James hadn't thought of himself as a sentimental man. He'd been the strong one after his wife passed. The one who paid bills, cooked dinner, stayed composed at the funeral. But this drawer had its own memory. And as he sifted through its contents, he realized something that made his chest tighten. He wasn't holding on to memories. He was holding on to pause. There were birthday cards unsigned. Letters never mailed. A dog tag from a dog long buried, wrapped in a sock he never threw away. Each item said, in its own quiet way, "You didn't finish this." And that, in Feng Shui, is one of the hardest things to face. Because energetic clutter isn't just about things. It's about what's unresolved. What never had closure. What lingers in drawers and corners because you're scared that letting go means losing it forever. But Feng Shui doesn't ask you to forget. It asks you to release energy from the role of gatekeeper. James closed his eyes. And in that stillness, he remembered a moment with his daughter, Rachel. She was 8 at the time, had just broken her favorite toy and was inconsolable. He told her, "If you hold it too tight, it stays broken." It hit him like a wave. He'd been doing exactly that with drawers, with photos, with grief. Holding it too tight. Keeping it broken. Afraid that healing meant forgetting. He opened the back door to the cold wind. Let it pass through the house like a clearing bell. Then, piece by piece, he gathered everything from that drawer. He didn't throw it away. That would have been cruel. Instead, he chose one box. Just one. Not for stuff, but for stories. He wrote a note to himself. Keep what brings warmth. Release what only echoes. The rest, the undone, the painful, the paused, he blessed. Out loud, he said, "Thank you, you mattered." And then he let them go. Some to donation, some to fire, some to earth. And as he watched the flames curl around a stack of unopened sympathy cards, he felt no guilt, only space. That night, he slept through till morning, something he hadn't done in almost 2 years. And when he woke, the house felt lighter. Not newer, just less haunted. And maybe, just maybe, that drawer had been holding back more than dust. It had been holding back flow, wealth, rest, permission. Because sometimes the most dangerous feng shui mistake isn't what you see. It's what you refuse to revisit, and what you store silently as proof that you can't move on. James had avoided the attic for years. Not consciously, not deliberately. It was just easier that way. Out of sight, out of thought. He always told himself he'd get to it eventually. On a rainy day, on a winter weekend, when things felt less busy. But life never gave him that moment. Or maybe deep down, he never really wanted it. Because the attic wasn't just about boxes. It was a vault. A sealed archive of who he used to be. A version of himself he didn't know how to face anymore. The morning he finally opened the hatch, something inside him hesitated. The ladder groaned like it hadn't held weight in years. The smell of old insulation met him halfway up, sharp, dry, sour. And when he stepped onto the attic floor, it was like stepping into a forgotten version of time. Still, dense. As if air hadn't moved there in a decade. The boxes were all there. Stacked in lines. Some labeled. Some collapsed from age. Some swollen with the weight of memory. He reached for the first one. A box marked James 2008. Inside were framed awards, business cards, a monogrammed pen, a leather-bound planner still bookmarked in October. That was the year he'd nearly made regional director. The year everything was building toward more. And then nothing. His wife's diagnosis had come in November. He had stepped down by December. He never touched those papers again. James sat back on his heels, breath tight. He hadn't remembered what was in that box. But his body had. His body always knew where he stopped growing. Where he chose stillness instead of grief. Where he paused a version of himself and quietly stored it out of reach. And that's what makes this a true feng shui mistake. Because old, untouched storage isn't neutral. It's energetic stasis. It's movement denied. It's a message that says, I can't go further than this. Each unopened box in James's attic wasn't just stuff. It was a version of him frozen in amber. Still trying to process a moment he never let himself feel. One box held baby clothes, his son's, folded too neatly, as if untouched since the day they were put away. Another box had her handwriting on it. Holiday decor, keep for next year. But she never saw that next year. And yet James had kept the box, unopened, for 10 Decembers. His throat burned, not from dust, but from the realization that he had been building a museum to a life that was no longer here. And in doing so, he'd closed the door to the life that could be. That's what old storage does. It tricks you into thinking you're being careful, when in truth, you're being held hostage by what you're unwilling to grieve. He didn't purge everything that day. James wasn't reckless, but he did begin. He opened every box with intention, said every name aloud, held each object like it mattered but not like it owned him. Some things he repurposed. Some he released. Some he simply honored, then let go. Into the wind, into a fire pit, into memory. And as the attic emptied, the light began to shift. The sun caught in the dusty air like gold. The room breathed, and so did he. A week later, the house felt different. Not just lighter, but possible. He found himself humming while doing dishes. He opened windows without needing a reason. He caught himself smiling at mail, even the junk ones. And then a call. A woman from the community center had heard about his background. Would he be willing to teach a short course on energy in home design? She said, "You have a way of seeing space differently." He chuckled, because only now, after clearing the attic, did he finally see it too. So if you're watching this and thinking, it's just old boxes, ask yourself, what part of me have I stopped visiting? Because energy isn't just about flow, it's about presence. And anything you haven't touched in years might still be touching you. Not in nostalgia, but in delay. Let it move. Let it breathe. Let it go. And see what comes in once the weight is finally gone. You know, we talk a lot about change. New habits, new mindset, new beginnings. But sometimes, the change you really need doesn't start with something new. It starts with letting go of what's been sitting there, quietly blocking your way. That drawer you haven't opened, that box you haven't touched, that corner you haven't looked at in years. James thought his house just needed a little organizing. But what he really needed was to stop carrying versions of himself he no longer was. And maybe you feel it too. That invisible heaviness. That, I don't know why I'm stuck feeling. It might not be your schedule. It might not be your mindset. It might be your storage. Not just the physical stuff, but the emotional weight that came with it. The identities, the fears, the unprocessed goodbyes. Because Feng Shui is never just about furniture. It's about flow. And flow can't happen in a space that's holding on too tightly. So if this story reminded you of a corner in your life, a literal one, or maybe just one inside, thank you for being here. Hit like, subscribe, leave a comment if something opened in you today. We share 2 new videos every day, and this space is here for you. Quiet, gentle, but always moving. And if you're ready to take the next step, watch the next video about your entryway. Because how you let energy in is how you let life in. Until then, your space speaks. Wisdom listens.